I really needed a break after my couple of videos on Revenge of the Sith. From export problems to copyright issues, Disney really is protective of Episode 3 in particular. I did not feel like dipping my toes in the Disney pond again and risking another round of problems so quickly. But it turns out it's really hard to avoid Disney because they own pretty much all I want to talk about, except for one of my favorite shows, Aaron Sorkin's very own The West Wing. Season 2 is my personal favorite season of any show. Today, in particular, we are going to hone in on Season 2, Episode 18, entitled 17 People. Now, full disclaimer, I am no Savage Books or Just Right, but I do appreciate good writing when I see it. To catch you up to this point, in case you don't know, the show follows the administration of President Josiah Jed Bartlet, played by Martin Sheen. It starts during his first term and follows him and his staff as they navigate the issues and politics of the day, many of which will sadly still resonate today as much as they did back then, which goes to show how quickly stuff gets done. We learn that President Bartlet was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis some years prior to now, and that he's been keeping it from the public and even many of his close associates. This episode picks up after Toby Ziegler, the White House's communications director, has an interesting conversation with the vice president, wherein the VP hinted at some pretty cryptic stuff about the president on his way out the door. Toby's been sitting on this conversation for days, wondering why the VP said what he did, what he meant, and why he put out an opinion poll at some point, something that someone would do if they were thinking of running for president. Toby runs his concerns by Leo McGarry, the White House Chief of Staff and the president's longtime friend and confidant. Leo dismisses him multiple times over a few days, until Toby eventually connects a few too many dots. The VP is clearly preparing to run for president because he thinks Bartlet is not going to run for a second term, and Leo knows why.
Excuse me, Mr. President?
I closed the embassies in Tanzania and Brussels.
What about domestic?
I don't have to make that call yet.
How much time do you have?
About an hour.
Mr. President, I've got Toby waiting in his office right now.
Why?
We've got to tell him.
Tell him what?
We've got to tell him.
What happened?
And by the way, the tidbit about closing the embassies in Brussels and Tanzania will come back later in a big way. Dropping it here like it's unrelated is a good way to start laying narrative breadcrumbs. We have a B-plot involving the team trying to punch up the president's speech for the upcoming White House Correspondents' Dinner. If you're unfamiliar, it's supposed to be a relatively light and good-natured affair where people can poke fun at folks in and around the administration, and then vice versa. Think of it as a Washington Beltway roast.
So don't pay attention to the approval ratings that say that 68% of Americans disapprove of the job this man is doing. I ask you this, does that not also logically mean that 68% approve of the job he's not doing?
Of course, the White House Correspondents' Dinner is known as the prom of Washington, D.C., a term coined by political reporters who clearly never had the chance to go to an actual prom.
I'm not saying both candidates are old, but you know Jimmy Carter is out there thinking, I could maybe win this thing.
If you've seen clips of comedians in tuxedos making fun of the president in the same room, it's probably this. Anyway, the problem is President Bartlet's speech isn't funny, and the staff is desperately trying to fix that. There's some good stuff in there, but we're not going to cover this B-side all that much, but it does bleed into this scene here a little bit where Toby and Leo are waiting outside the Oval Office.
Did you see the draft for the Correspondents' Dinner?
Yeah.
It's not funny.
Sam's gonna work on it.
Toby, take it easy in there, okay?
Having your characters talk about something totally unrelated is a great way to hint at the awkwardness they both feel, not to mention all that air between lines. They are both a million miles away. Toby is stoic and still, with his arms crossed and his head down. He's deep in thought. Leo can't stop moving though. Maybe it's nervous energy, and neither one is looking at the other. This small talk means nothing to either of them. And then you have that impressively massive gap of dead air. After their small talk fizzles out, we get 14 seconds of unbroken silence. And that doesn't just happen. You can bet that was a very deliberate decision. Each character is doing a lot in those 14 seconds. If you want a piece of advice you can put on a shirt, it's this: a good writer knows what to say. A great writer knows when not to say it. I really like this next bit, and it'll be hard to split it up as much as I need to since it's best experienced in one go, but I'll do my best.
Good evening, Mr. President.
Hey, Toby, you want a drink?
No, thank you, sir. I'm fine.
Have a drink with me.
Sure.
Bourbon the white.
Thank you.
You know, and I just found out recently, to be called bourbon has to come from Kentucky, otherwise it's called sour mash. An Algerian-born terrorist named Redin Assam was arrested at the Canadian border yesterday with a U-Haul containing 10 2-ounce jars filled with nitroglycerin.
And they don't allow that kind of thing at Yosemite?
No.
Shorthand can be a good way to set tone, or clue you into how a character is doing. Softening Toby up with a drink and pouring some liquid courage for himself, we don't need to be told how Bartlett thinks this is going to go. Plus, we see how much Toby wants to get down to business. He can't tell the president to cut the small talk, but he can help things along as quickly as he can. Here we see that seemingly unrelated small talk again. You'll see it pop up in shows written by Aaron Sorkin a lot. It's a bit of a device he likes to use. Here is where we get more information pertaining to those embassy closures the president mentioned to Leo. It's a good way of doing two things at once. I like how he pivots from bourbon to terrorism on a dime with no segue whatsoever. Coming from anyone else, it could come across as rambling and nervous. But Bartlett is very deliberate in how he handles the conversation.
What about the FAA?
They want me to order the airports to heighten security, but it's a holiday weekend. I don't know. Toby, I gotta tell you something.
Does the FAA have to present evidence of a credible threat?
Yeah.
How do they do that?
I don't know. They do it.
Excuse me, sir, is there a time frame?
About an hour. Toby, around 10 years ago, for a period of a few months, I was feeling run down and I had a pain in my leg. They both eventually subsided, but then 8 years ago, the pain came back, as well as numbness. My vision would be blurry sometimes and I'd get dizzy. During an eye exam, the doctor detected abnormal pupil responses and ordered an MRI. The radiologist found plaque on my brain and spine. I have a relapsing remitting course of MS.
Bartlett pivots on a dime again because Toby is caught on the national security thing. It's a great way to still catch the audience off guard even though they know what news is coming. Starting the conversation with small talk and then moving on to something big and then dropping a big bomb is a way to reset a character's expectations if they initially walk into the room with their ears already perked up. Bartlett fills in the gaps in Toby's knowledge about his disease for the benefit of the viewer as well. As Bartlett puts it, there's a good kind and a bad kind of MS, and he's got the good kind, to which Toby asks,
Does relapsing
Ever turn into secondary progressive?
Yeah.
Sure.
Is there any way of telling if it's going to?
No.
The implication is staggering. Once again, the silence that follows does a metric ton of heavy lifting. In fact, there is a lot of air in this episode. The viewers and characters need moments to chew on what just happened. Without it, things begin to feel breakneck and inauthentic. The president goes off to take a call, leaving Toby and Leo alone.
First of all, who else knows?
You're the 16th person.
Who else?
I'll tell you some of them. I won't tell you all of them.
Why not?
Because it's not entirely my business. I'm not sure of my footing here. The president will be off the phone in a minute, and in the meantime, you'll take what I give
It's
you.
not entirely your business?
Many writers would be tempted to have Toby challenge Leo immediately after he says it's not his business. Having Toby wait until Leo finishes his thought and then going back packs way more punch than having him stop Leo right then. Leo won't be able to control the conversation. In addition, this is where Leo and Toby's perspectives, their positions, start to be made known, and where the central question of the episode begins to take shape. Is the president's health a personal matter or not? Also note that Leo tells Toby that he's now the 16th person to know about this, but you may wonder why the episode is called 17 People, and that'll come up later. Leo lists off a few of the people who know, including a couple doctors and the president's family. Toby presses for more names.
That's it for
He
now.
took a physical. Those doctors are from 8 years ago. He took a physical and
It's in
disclosed that.
remission. It doesn't show up during a physical.
Yeah.
It's in remission. Nobody lied.
Nobody lied?
Nobody.
Nobody lied?
Repeating the same thing from different angles, one from conviction and the other from sheer incredulity, is another way to get the viewer to get personally invested in the big argument. This technique makes the audience look at this statement with a magnifying glass.
He gets a physical twice a year at Bethesda. His doctors are naval officers. Are you telling me that officers are involved in this?
Toby.
These guys are going to be court-martialed.
Nobody. Listen to me. Nobody lied. Nobody was asked to lie.
Coercion.
Nobody was asked to lie.
Here's that repetition again. In this case, the slight change in verbiage at the end is glaring. Nobody was asked to lie. It digs a little deeper into Toby's real issue. Did the administration actively try to cover this up? And Leo, intentionally or not, gives himself a little bit of an out here. If someone did lie, then it wasn't their fault because they were not asked to. It's the sort of tactic you'll see a lot in, for instance, Senate hearings or court proceedings. The president comes back from his phone call with the FAA and gives a little update on the situation with the terrorist. Toby goes on to connect a few more dots. If the president had an episode a couple days before the previous year's State of the Union address, that would have also been the same day he was also in the Situation Room dealing with an incident between India and Pakistan.
So in the middle of it, I don't know what you call it.
An episode.
You were in the Situation Room as Commander-in-Chief.
I know, I can't believe we're all still here.
Bartlett began the evening pretty straightforward, open, and even flippant at times, but his joke is anything but light. Here is where he's really starting to bristle at points that Toby, frankly, can be forgiven for implying. Could this president, as commander-in-chief, ever be compromised without warning and with no obvious signs during a major crisis? Bartlett's sarcastic response, coupled with his unbroken, intense eye contact, makes it clear that Toby needs to watch himself. And sarcasm, such as this, is an effective, clear, and quick way for one character to signal to another just how little they care for what they're saying. But he goes on to address Toby's concern. He was surrounded by his hand-picked team of capable experts, such as the Director of National Security and the Secretary of State. And while he's listing off these people, Toby pivots.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was with me, as were the Secretaries of State and
Do you
Defense.
receive medication?
I'm sorry?
Do you receive medication?
I get injections of beta-seron.
From whom?
From a doctor.
None of your current doctors are aware of your condition, Mr. President. Is your wife medicating you?
I think it'd be best, while temperatures are running a little high, that you refer to my wife as Mrs. Bartlett or the First Lady.
There's a reason Winston Churchill regularly used repetition and pauses. They work. Each second draws you closer and closer in, because it's through it that we know how much Toby does not want to ask this question, and how much the president is warning him not to ask it. Leo enters the scene again, and Bartlett catches him back up to speed with another bit of sarcasm that Toby thinks that he, as the president, was in a drug-induced haze during the incident between India and Pakistan. Leo turns to Toby and restates the president's talking point.
I was there with him. So was Fitz. So was Cashman, Hutchinson, Burial.
Well, that's fantastic.
Toby.
None of you were elected.
I was elected, they were appointed. Vice President was elected. He has the constitutional authority to assume my
Not
office.
last May. He didn't. He didn't last May when you were under general anesthesia.
That's because I never signed the letter, but I don't think I got shot because I got MS.
They're referring to an assassination attempt last season. Bartlett had to be put under because he was hit. Bartlett tries to derail Toby's point by saying his MS had nothing to do with why he had to be put under. Toby says the cause of the shooting was not his point. What Toby is getting at is that the VP did not even get to assume the duties he should have when the president was put under, to which Bartlett retorts that it was just because he had not signed the letter, and that's when Toby dots the I.
So I'm led to wonder, given your condition and its lack of predictability, why there isn't simply a signed letter sitting in a file. someplace? And the answer, of course, is that if there was a signed letter sitting in a file someplace, somebody would ask why.
While President Bartlett thought he was deflecting Toby's points, he was actually helping him build his case. The vice president could not assume Bartlett's duties because he had not signed a letter ahead of time, to which Toby points out, were the president to suffer an episode which could happen at any point in time, at a critical moment, there will be no way to hand off power to the VP. In Bartlett's condition, there really should be a pre-signed letter, and that's the kind of thing that any fan, like on Reddit, would point out, because if there's anything fans love, it's poking holes. It's very difficult to make an airtight narrative devoid of inconsistency or anachronisms that still has compelling drama and conflict. Rather than hope your viewers or readers ignore these gaps or don't catch them, why not have one of the characters point those out in a way that feels true? If something doesn't make sense when you think about it, have a character think about it and ride that conflict. Toby goes on to argue that in that scenario where Bartlett is incapacitated, power would fall on a group of unelected individuals rather than the VP who was elected, because it happened. Toby could have connected all those dots himself in the form of a page-long monologue, but having a tense back and forth that steadily builds up to one ultimate point puts so much more weight behind it when it eventually comes out. Rather than coming across like someone's opinion, the merits behind Toby's conclusion are shown to be based upon agreed upon facts. It all culminates in a heated moment where Toby declares there was a coup for 90 minutes last year, while Leo wielded all the powers of the office through his own authority. Nobody knows what to expect now.
And the walls came tumbling down. I feel fine, by the way. Thanks for asking.
Sir.
No, Leo. Toby's concern for my health is moving me in ways...
Mr. President.
We don't really know what to do with humor in tense moments like this, and Bartlett's sarcastic joke was very intentional on the part of the writing. Bartlett knows he can't answer Toby's argument. What he chooses to do instead is pivot to another issue on his mind, and that's a good way to keep a conflict going. If the math isn't adding up for someone in an argument, have them change the math.
Are you pissed because I didn't say anything, or are you pissed because there were 15 people who knew before you did? I feel fine, by the way. Thanks for asking.
Arguments between people who know each other very well can be really cutting. Bartlett's rhetorical question isn't baseless. Toby sort of has the reputation of having a big ego. Rather than follow Toby's reasoning about constitutional law, Bartlett makes it personal now, and all but accuses Toby of being heartless and a bad friend, something Toby has no doubt thought about in the past. Here we realize something we may not have considered up to this point. The president's building anger may not have been driven solely by a disdain for Toby's questioning, but rather by being hurt at the question Toby never asked. Are you okay? Toby and Leo step outside while the president takes another call. Leo asks Toby what he thinks could happen honestly if and when they break the news to the public. Toby says he can think of 5 things. The president can run and lose, run and win, choose not to run.
And what are the other 2?
Leo,
You think he's gonna need to resign?
there's gonna be hearing upon hearing upon hearing.
He hasn't broken a law.
Be that as it may, even if the president hasn't broken a law, Toby bursts Leo's bubble and drops his 5th and final possible outcome at the same time.
And you don't have to break the law to get served with articles of impeachment.
Toby, it is never gonna get that far.
Write down the exact date and time you said that.
The pair moves back into the Oval Office as the president gets off his call. Throughout the evening, he's been dealing with the situation involving a possible national security threat and whether or not to heighten security at the airports. He decides to do so at this time after finally getting enough information to make the call.
Thanks. I didn't know enough.
I know the feeling.
I have no intention of apologizing to you, Toby.
Would you mind if I ask why not?
Because you're not the one with MS, a wife, 3 kids, and airports to close. Not every part of me belongs to you. This was personal. I'm not willing to relinquish that right.
Bartlett crystallizes his point of view on the central question in all this. Presidents are people and have a right to privacy. Some things are sacred. Fair enough. But then Toby does the same thing.
It will appear to many, if not most, as fraud. It will appear as if you denied the voters an opportunity to decide for themselves. You're generally not willing to relinquish that right either.
His thesis? Presidents are the most special kind of public servant put in place by the people who have a right to make an informed opinion. Nothing is sacred. Both of these statements, these positions, could have been made at the outset, but that would have made this whole thing an intellectual exercise, as opposed to a character-driven argument and debate. With all their cards on the table, and the argument all but played out, while we're mulling over our thoughts on the issue, Toby drops one more thing on his way out, giving us our episode title.
It's 17 people, by the way.
I'm sorry?
You knew. We weren't counting you at 17 people.
I don't know. It may have been unbelievably stupid. May have been unthinkably stupid. I don't know. I'm sorry, I really am.
Sometimes the more defensive we are, the more we know we're wrong. At the end of the day, Bartlett knows his lie of omission was intentional, deliberate, and made all the difference in getting him where he is.
I've got to go in the other room and...
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Berman.
I think that's exactly how emotionally spent people would act in this situation. There's no need to put a button on it or make a meal out of it. They're just done. The visual homage to The Godfather, which the episode ends on, seals the sinking feeling that Toby still has. Our two characters may understand each other better now, but that doesn't mean everything is sunshine and roses now. In fact, Toby is now cursed with knowing too much. There's no such thing as a bulletproof script with no flaws, but ones like this have a lot to appreciate. And if you have any interest at all in writing, I recommend diving into The West Wing, especially with rumors of a return making the rounds. Sure, parts of it have not aged well, but there are a lot of great gems in there. I'd like to ask you, what are your favorite examples of good dialogue? As usual, grab a like on your way out. Check out some of my backlog if you're not familiar. With a full-time job and a family, I wouldn't be doing all this stuff if I didn't truly enjoy it, and your support provides a big boost. I really appreciate it. For now, stay tough and stop by again sometime.